It's called the school-to-prison pipeline, and it's a national trend where children are funneled out of public schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice system.
And we look at the children who is incarcerated. This child, a punishment for holding his food slot. He's being chained to the food slot. 16, 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, pregnant women inside solitary and incarceration. These photographs were taken by Professor Richard Ross of Berkeley, California. He has a project called Juvenile Injustice. And what he's showing is like how 12-year-olds are in solitary, how we have youth who are 18 and 16 left inside a cell with no items, how we chain our youth, devices of torture that are used to restrain children, like the Ethan Allen School in Wisconsin. This is a school considerably, but it's similar to a maximum security correctional facility. Here we have also in another cell in South Bend, Indiana, this is considered a schoolyard. So it's a cage with a little basketball court, and that's what it is for the kids. And we're talking about housing and torturing children.
Five Muallim Ak is now a prison reform activist and director of the Incarcerated Nation campaign. He spent 12 years in prison, and while incarcerated in New York State Prison, he spent 5 of those 12 years in solitary confinement for non-violent infractions. His activism has reached schools and universities nationwide. These images fill the walls of his office, reminding him every day of the difficult task before him in his fight for reform.
So if a kid acts out in school, you change suspension to incarceration. So literally, instead of suspending school kids or really creating a system that has restorative justice, when I was young, if you act up, you had to write on the chalkboard, you had to help the teacher out, you had to do some type of remedial task that satisfied the environment in the school. That is no longer exists. Detention is another thing. The Board of Education is non-existent. You don't stay after school to take up classes. You go to jail. You go to prison. So the school to prison pipeline is basically shaping the school similar to a prison. We have armed guards. We have security measures that's close to like security going through the airport. You have to go to metal detectors. You have to be hand down, mat, hand wands. You have metal detectors. You have cameras. We spent more money putting cameras in schools than we did in prisons in the last 5 years in America. And literally, we have probation officer. We have a police officer. We have a guidance officer. We have another officer inside the school. We have all these components, this system of containment, and children have to navigate. It takes them 20 minutes to navigate through this system of containment to get into the school. And once they get into school, they can walk right out the back door. Ain't nobody stopping them.
Five's son Shaquille recently graduated from high school and knows all too well about the challenges facing youth in public schools.
A lot of problems with the high school systems today is getting inside the high schools at first. Like, you're missing out on educational time just trying to get through security, just trying to get through the metal detectors, getting through armed guards, you know what I mean? Signing in, swiping your ID, you're late for your first period class, you're missing out on your education. And it's really intimidating. You know, it leaves the students with a sort of hostility. As soon as they wake up in the morning, people are tired. You know, I mean, we're coming in 7 o'clock in the morning, and you know what I mean, bright and early out of our beds to go through a hassle. Like, it's basically like airport security to get into your high school, you know what I mean? And it leaves kids messed up in the morning, feeling groggy and, you know, not even half awake.
Today, Shaquille works side by side his father at the Incarcerated Nation campaign. He is the director of youth services, where he aims to educate his peers and give a voice to youth at risk of incarceration. He tells me there is a direct correlation between the public school system and the prison system.
The school systems, it's like there's no room for error. There's a zero tolerance policy, you know what I mean? Like, if a kid is having a bad morning, he didn't eat dinner last night, you know what I mean? He's coming into school angry about, or anything could be on his mind and he acts out about it, or he acts out in any way, he's automatically punished. He's automatically, there's an automatic consequence for his actions, you know what I mean? There's no detention, there's no counseling, there's no, in a lot of schools, in a lot of underprivileged schools, you know, there's not detentions, there's no counselors, there's nobody who gets on you on the one-to-one level to try to see and figure out what's the problem.
Some argue that the increase in security measures is a result of rising fears about violence in schools. One example is the 1999 Columbine High School shooting. However, according to author and Hofstra University professor Alan Singer, the stage was set long before Columbine.
Our modern school system really starts in the 1920s. And the idea at the time was that it would prepare blue-collar immigrants and their children for blue-collar jobs. But by the 1960s, those jobs disappeared, and the rationale for the organization of high school and factory model no longer made sense. And as those jobs disappeared, the schools have more and more shifted to what I call prison model. So First, you have the disappearance of work. And then in the 1970s, you have massive budget cuts, partly as a result of the war in Vietnam. And schools are cut back, teachers are laid off, schools become much more overcrowded, and the whole schools have become chaotic. Then you have the 1980s, you have a crack epidemic. Crack epidemic destroys communities, it destroys families, contributes to that sense of general decay in inner city communities. By the 1990s, you have private companies that are investing in prisons. You have the outsourcing of prisons to these private concerns. And these private concerns, they need raw material. They need the kids to make their profit. And so you have this whole justification of sending the kids to jail. You have the zero tolerance ideology emerges, and the idea behind zero tolerance is that you step out of bounds, something wrong with you, you're going to be sent to jail.
According to Michael Denzel Smith, a fellow at the Nation Institute, while crime rates have gone down, incarceration has increased in recent years.
We are addicted to incarceration. We're addicted to the profits that come through incarceration. We're addicted to free labor, cheap labor, and the way that we produce that now is through the prison system. And so the way, when crime nationally, like the number of crimes, actual crimes being committed over the past 30 to 40 years has actually gone down in the United States. Like we're reducing the amount of crime, but the prison population exploded, in part due to the war on drugs, but in part because we criminalized more things. Like we started to criminalize homelessness, we criminalized mental illnesses, and we locked people up, and we locked them up for longer periods of time. So the prison population has exploded over this time, and we are so beholden to it as an economic force and also just a social control.
Through the juvenile courts and the adult criminal justice system, the United States incarcerates more of its youth than any other country in the world. In 2002, approximately 126,000 juveniles were incarcerated in youth detention facilities alone. Approximately 500,000 youth are brought to detention centers in a given year. This data does not reflect juvenile trialed as adults. Around 40% are incarcerated in privatized for-profit facilities. Singer, who has also taught at high schools across New York and was a guest teacher at Rikers Island Jail Complex, says the issue of race plays a leading role.
White people increasingly are fearful of black minority youth, of immigrant youth, and the zero tolerance and sending kids to jail has just become a way of engaging white voters to support right-wing conservative candidates.
Minority youth are disproportionately represented in incarcerated populations relative to their representation in the general public. A recent report from the National Council on Crime and Delinquency found that Black and Hispanic youth are treated more severely than white youth at every point of contact with the system, from arrest to detention to incarceration, even when charged with the same crime, a point highlighted in a recent article by Smith.
We are a nation built on racism, and that's the way that the system functions, and you will find that on every level of every institution of American life. But also just the perception then of what that produces, the idea that Black youth are more dangerous, more criminal. Until we break that, until we really investigate racism, we investigate the capitalist system under which we operate, we're not going to break our addiction to prison. And when you need bodies in that prison, you're going to either criminalize more behaviors, or you're going to ensure that you have those bodies from a younger and younger age, and that's what the school to prison pipeline does.
According to a recent study by the New York Civil Liberties Union, the neighborhood with the highest percentage of low-income students, the South Bronx here in New York, also has the highest rate of suspensions. When Five and I visited South Bronx, he showed me how close the correlation between the school to prison pipeline really is.
Like most schools in New York, because of overcrowding, they create external trailers for the school. And these trailers are classrooms, systemically actually, because of overcrowding, because of lack of funding. And then we have a whole different private school system like charter schools, which is traded on the stock market, and literally it's the IPA. It's literally a public organization that people can buy stock in. So you have people making millions off of the system that varies between public schooling and private schooling. So the private charter schools get funding and get more better education. People and students and parents want their kids to get a better education, so they invest in the private schools, which make profits off their kids. So one of the situations about in mass incarceration is when a person comes home, where are they going to live? They're denied public housing. Most people are from public housing or live in poor environments, can't return to that. In New York State, a person who's incarcerated has to return to their county of conviction. So let's say a person lived in this housing project, he's arrested, he spends 10 years upstate somewhere 15 miles away from his family, 15 hours away. He comes back here, but guess what? He's not allowed in public housing. So where did he have to send them? We have private organizations that open up around the areas that people are not allowed, that profiteer off the housing of them. So the profiteering is made off of the price that the taxpayers pay. $2,700 a month is what they get per person that lives in this place, basically because of shelter allowance. Then they have to take alcohol substance abuse treatment programs. So this organization has a satellite organization that gives them services. They get paid for that. They have to take anger management. They haven't had any type of altercation inside. They take ART when they come out. They profiteer for that. They have to pay for parole, $30 a month. They have to literally find employment, and they have to live here. And then so it creates a system where they're still profiteering off a person once they come out of prison. And this is how close to me the pipeline is, because we're preparing kids for this, literally, because this is the next step after incarceration. Because you know what? This is a mandate from parole. You have to live here.
Once in the juvenile justice system, little hope exists of escaping.
Earlier, I sat down with a mother who hasn't seen her son in months. He's been incarcerated twice. The first time he was picked up was when he was 16 years old, and he was kept for 4 years. He's currently in federal prison under the suspicion of having a firearm. However, his mother tells me that he did not possess a firearm at the time he was picked up back in January. Now, at first, she was reluctant to talk to me, mainly because she was afraid that if authorities saw her interview, they would take it out on her son. She ultimately agreed, hoping to be a voice for other mothers in her situation. Here's part of our interview.
They arrested him saying that he was being charged with possession of a firearm as a felon. Right now, that's all we basically know. He wasn't picked up with a firearm. They didn't he didn't have a firearm on him. They picked him up basically a month later from when they saying the incident actually happened. So we really don't know. Some officers came to my home saying that my son had a warrant for his arrest, and when I asked to see the warrant, they showed me like a profile paper. It wasn't no warrant, and I told them when they come back with a warrant that they can, speak with my son. They never came back. When he went to court for a separate case on January 31st, they picked him up from the courthouse. When we tried to speak with the detective that left the card, they said they didn't even know who he was. He didn't work at the precinct or anything, so we don't really know what the case is about.
She believes her son was targeted because they had put out a civilian review case against police harassment before he was arrested the first time as a minor.
Some officers been harassing my son since he was a kid, just because of the neighborhood he's from, I feel. We put out a civilian complaint review case against them, and since then, it's just been constant harassment, even to the point where he did a state time for 4 years, and even while he was locked up, they was coming to my home saying he did things, and I'm asking them, how are they saying that if he's locked up in your care? So I know it's harassment, because even when he was not home, they was still coming.
Her message to the police is clear and simple.
To the officers, do your job, stop locking up innocent kids, and for the people who can help our children. Because one, they know we from the inner city. We don't have money like that. We can't afford these high-profile lawyers. So help our children if you can. Help them, because they being held for stuff they're not really doing.
The odds of returning to Department of Youth Services increases 13.5 times for youth with a prior commitment, which is more than carrying a weapon, gang membership, or poor parental relationships.
What they'll do is they'll target kids. They'll pick them up for small offenses. And what happens is kids will then plead guilty to the small offense, a small felony, and they'll be let go. But what kids don't understand is that once they plead guilty to this small offense, and they're allowed to walk, they could then get picked up for virtually anything, and they could be sent back to jail. They don't even have to prove they did anything. They just have to prove they violated their parole. So what you have is a lot of kids just marking time in these cells, who are marking time because they fell into the trap. They fell into the trap, they pleaded guilty to something, and I'm not saying they didn't do it, but they pleaded guilty to something. They thought they were allowed to walk. They thought they would be given another chance. They're just being set up. Now in New York, the jails are full of kids who then get picked up on the second offense. But it's worse in other states. In the old Confederacy, kids are talked to about pleading guilty. They plead guilty. Not only are they at risk of getting picked up again because they're sent down to the same communities where they were before, but now they lose their citizenship rights. They lose their right to vote. They will never regain it.
When students are forced out of school for disruptive behavior, they are usually sent back to the same neighborhoods, low income, with no to little resources, stigmatized and falling behind in their studies.
They are a symptom of the problem of the breakdown of communities and the failure of our society to address it. I don't believe schools are going to address all the problems of society. What schools do is they reinforce the society and they prepare people for entry in a society which has no jobs. So you have young people coming out of inner city communities, going to schools, going to boarding schools, getting suspended for inconsequential actions, being talked to badly by security guards. So what ends up happening is they get suspended, they stop coming. Well, in these communities, which are often in decay, the gangs become their family. The gangs become the employer of last resort. The gangs help to protect kids from other gangs. So what ends up happening is the gangs are not the cause. The gangs are the symptom of societal decay in inner cities.
We visited Project Uplift, located in a housing project in South Bronx, which aims to create a pipeline between public high schools and colleges.
Our focus is to be able to, aside from providing work readiness and the college readiness, is to provide kind of a social empowerment and civic responsibility for our students. Something that it's almost never touched on in this section here. Because of our demographic and the whole I guess how we are formed, it's a little hard for us to get services.
While Project Uplift aims to work with legislators to close the gap between the school to prison pipeline, the realities on the ground are far more challenging than one could imagine, notably lack of funding and direct action.
Realistically speaking, we know the fact of our community. We know where we come from. We know kind of the pyramids that's been installed here for a long time, and the paradigms that that people have living in such a community. We are probably the poorest community, if not in the country. We are less resourced than anybody else, and so when these programs come here, they expect us to perform miracles overnight. And so if we are not able to meet those same milestones as a program in upstate New York or another county, whereas the people within that tax bracket are more affluent, more better resourced, more educated, then we are deemed as underperformers.
And when they face budget cuts, their programs fall apart and student participants fall through the cracks and often end up in the system.
Just recently around here, we had I think about 100, youth were arrested, over an alleged drug bust. And so what that does is that it brings us, it kind of validates what we're here to do, but then the question becomes, here you are, have these operations to kind of make sure you take them off the streets. What programs do you have, or what contribution have you actually made to keeping them out of those jails, to keep them off the streets and in schools? So a lot of these programs are very important and serves as part of the vital pillars of the community.
It's not only in New York, in many other states, there is no financial incentive for counties to invest in alternatives like prevention, such as peer mediation, guidance counseling, and mentoring in order to reduce conflicts that lead to police intervention.
We're here at the Forest Community Housing Center in the Bronx, which is possibly one of the poorest neighborhoods of not only in New York State, but in all of America. And this is the community center for the youth. It's probably one of the only places here in the neighborhood where the youth can come, they can hang out, maybe play some basketball. And what's significant is if you're on this side of the fence of this community center in these projects, then you're pretty much safe from stop and frisk, search and seizure on the part of the police. However, if you go on the other side of the fence, then you're pretty much on your own, no matter how old you are, 15, 16, 12, it really doesn't matter. Partly because, or mostly because, this is federal property.
New York's new mayor, Bill de Blasio, made a campaign promise of better juvenile justice policies. Policies that keep students in the classroom rather than in a cell or on the streets. All my guests agreed that by increasing the funding for education and by job training programs, New York City could improve its crime statistics and possibly lower future rates of poverty. At the end of the day, is it really that difficult to invest in education?